Yeah. I'm here to change the game up, I'm here to shuffle up the deck. You'll probably think I'm famous cause I got a blue check. I remember playing ball up in Montreal.
Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Running Through podcast, where we don't talk about any running events that happen because sports are canceled. But in the meantime, hopefully I can keep you a little bit company as you socially distance yourself, or as I like to say, ghost ride your social circle. And we'll just kind of jump into things because there is a lot to talk about. I had two podcasts last week. One talking about, me and Chris got on here last Tuesday to talk about our indoor predictions for NCAAs and what we thought would happen. Then I had Jake Riley on to talk about his amazing run a couple Saturdays ago. It feels like months ago now, about the his Olympic trials race, and looking forward to the Olympics. And I don't necessarily need to recant everything that's happened, but just to kind of take through the timeline of everything that has happened. You know, the big domino, and I made some YouTube videos about this last week, so I'm not going to go into all of it. If you want to see my thoughts on the whole thing, I'll link them below. But the big domino being the NBA postponing, then the NHL postponing because they share facilities, and then all the other sports looking at the way that COVID-19 and the coronavirus is spreading. We are now currently living in a sportless world. It's been a week. It's been 1 week since this happened. I dropped my episode with Jake Riley on Thursday, and then on Friday we started hearing of the cancellations and everything. Or it might have been Thursday night even. It's all happened so quickly. And then in that span, so you go from, okay, maybe everything's going to be postponed a couple weeks while we quarantine everything down. We make sure that people aren't spreading, that people aren't mass gathering. Well, now, the spread has continued. And I'm not a epidemiologist, but I do have a bio degree, so I know a little bit, just enough to be dangerous. But I think it's just one of those things where we are all a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious. I think the society as a whole is collectively anxious, and during times like this, you want to have an escape. And for people like myself, for a lot of people, sports are that escape. And when it gets serious enough that sports in general are canceled, then that's when you know that's time to start worrying, and it really puts things into perspective because you can't escape this anymore. It's gonna make an effect. I wanted to kind of take this time to talk about my general anxiety around everything that's going on, because as you know on this podcast, I like to talk about my mental health. Something I haven't really gone into on the podcast itself, because we've been doing a lot of guest podcasts and podcasts with Chris about predictions and everything, is I started medication about 3 months ago. After the New Year's, I was having a rough time, and I decided to go to a psychiatrist, get on 10 milligrams of Lexapro, and it's helped a lot. And I was thinking about this last week, and I was talking to Claire about this last week, about what would it be like if I hadn't gone on medication, because there were a couple of days last week where I was at a 10 anxiety-wise. And luckily, with being on medicine, it's easier for me to kind of come back down from that. And even yesterday, I was going to record this podcast yesterday, but it was my off day from work. And I was just, I don't know, I needed that day to recover and rest and sleep. And in the past, that would have gone on for a couple of days. And today would have been miserable because I would have just felt no energy and down, and I would have had that pit in my stomach that I've had previously, that sense of dread. But when I woke up today, I was feeling better. I went to work at the running store, and when I got there and I started doing things and I started disinfecting things and mopping the floor and going through the motions there, things started to feel better, and I started to feel a little more energized. And then I went for a run after work, ran home, and just seeing everyone out. So there weren't a lot of cars on the road, which was really eerie. But the other thing is, on the route I usually take home from work, I usually don't see any people. You might see one or two runners. But I saw maybe close to 100 runners. Went down through Waldo to the park, and then through downtown, just everyone's kind of out and getting their one-on-one time, which is the other thing. You saw a lot of people by themselves or with their dogs, maybe with one other person. There weren't any groups, which is good. That's what we asked for. You don't want to do a good thing by getting out and ruin it by clustering together. That's why we cancel these races. That's why everything's getting postponed. But it was kind of reassuring to see. Everyone waves at each other, and that runner's wave kind of gives you some energy, gives you some motivation to keep going. And in a time when everything's been so anxious and so like doom and gloom, it's good to see that stuff. And it's something that has really lifted my spirits tonight and going forward. So that's kind of how I felt about it. Being on medication has made it easier. I've been stressing about if I'd even have a job after this week because like the store might shut down. And I think we're lucky. We're unlucky. We're lucky that the store is open. We're unlucky in that we still have to interact with people and run the risk of running into somebody with COVID-19 symptoms. But we're also lucky in that anyone who works at a running store is not on the front lines. My dad's firefighter, my aunt is an ER nurse, and they're in it. They don't have a choice. They have to go one way or the other. And they're dealing with the people who are dealing with symptoms. So I find myself lucky in multiple ways. And as stressful as the time may be, as stressful as the idea of not having a paycheck for a couple weeks might be, I don't know. We're all going through it. So you'd have to think that if everyone's without a paycheck, then something's going to happen. But this isn't the podcast for that kind of talk. I just wanted to let you guys know where my mentality was coming into this, because generally that's why I started this podcast, was to talk through things. And this is kind of like my meditation preamble to open things up. Because now we're living in a sportsless world, and as a podcast who covers running and track and field, there's a lot of things that have been canceled. It's looking doubtful about some of our favorite events. David Motzi put together a good list of and this is even out of date after it went up yesterday and it's already out of date. Just in Kansas City, we had our two biggest races canceled last weekend, like 2 days for the race, and everyone was upset about it. But when the mayor is instituting a state of emergency and you're not allowed gatherings over, at that point it was over 1,000 people. Now it's down to over 10 people. That's in 4 days since that's happened. There have been a lot of races that have been canceled or postponed. Pretty much everything through the end of April at least, but even into May and end of May now. Obviously the big ones being Boston, London, Hamburg. Hamburg kind of was the first one to push off their marathon, followed by London and Boston. Boston and London have both rescheduled to the fall. I forgot about this because I haven't talked about this yet. It's been like a month's worth of news in like 2 days. Boston and London pushed off to the fall. So now, from early October to the end of November, you have about 7 major marathons. So that'll be interesting. That's going to be a lot of intrigue to see if anybody can double. Because realistically, you could run Boston to start the marathon. You know, Boston's going to be the start of the marathon season, and New York will be the end of November. Realistically, an elite could run Boston and have 7 weeks to recover and train again to run at New York. So that'll be kind of interesting, assuming we get to that point, assuming society is still standing. But that's just kind of like the tip of the iceberg, right? Those are the big things. Other kind of big races, Boulder was moved, Carlsbad 5000 was moved, the Paris Marathon was moved, the Brighton Marathon was moved, the Madrid Marathon was moved, the Credit Union Cherry Blossom 10 miler, that's a pretty huge race, that was moved. The Rome Marathon was moved. Mount Tack Relays, Kansas Relays, Vancouver Sun Run. Now, as of today, as of yesterday, Penn Relays had been rescheduled. As of today, Drake Relays has been rescheduled or postponed. They haven't rescheduled them yet. And it's starting to look like an outdoor season isn't happening. And we know that with NCAA's indoor championships were canceled. So that's why I'm not on here to talk about how I beat Chris in my reviews and how I'm so much better at predicting track and field than Chris is. I will talk about that, but that's not why I'm on here. I'm on here to talk about the fallout from that. So indoors was canceled. NCAA has canceled the spring season already. They canceled NCAA March Madness, which is huge. And they've ruled that they're going to reinstate eligibility for spring athletes, give them another year. They've ruled that they aren't going to reinstate winter athletes with another year. So anyone who's going to race NCAA's indoor, and this is their last chance, think of Joe Klecker and the like, this is kind of the end of the road for them. Because I highly doubt that someone the caliber of Joe Klecker is going to come back to school for another year when he could just turn pro with the prospects of whatever happens next year. It's a lot of money to leave on the table just for an NCAA title. So we're looking at a lot of our big track and field meets are pushed off or postponed. I know Dave Milner is still wanting to hold Music City in some way, shape, or fashion. I've been talking with everyone with District and with Eastern Track League, and they're wanting to hold their meets still, but everything's kind of up in the air. Everything's changing by the day at this point, and it's really starting to look at we're not going to have sports until the fall, because you can follow the money making sports and see what they've done. So NBA postponing, the first one to postpone, that's why the big domino dropped, because NBA postponing is leaving a lot of money on the table, and they have not said when or if they're going to come back. On the heels of that, NHL has today announced that they will not finish the season, so they might go start sometime in the summer with playoffs. There's a million different scenarios with that. The Olympics have said, and this is where I'll kind of go next after I get through talking about this, but the Olympics have come out with a statement, and I've been kind of gauging athletes and seeing what they think. But I think it's a little bit presumptuous to think that the trials and the marathon and the Olympics will go on as we kind of expect them to. Japan has come out and said that they will hold the Olympics, but this was 3 days ago, and in the day and age of the coronavirus pandemic, 3 days is 3 months. A lot has happened since then. In the U.S. right now, we're down to anything over a 10-person gathering is banned. So there's a lot of uncertainty going around with that. And just in the athlete's case, we can talk about our jobs. Our jobs being unsecure sucks, but people with these athletic contracts are losing their opportunities too. So all across the board, everyone is making sacrifice and everyone is suffering. That's why when I see videos of those guys in Texas that FloTrack was promoting running an impromptu 5K, 30 people on the track huddled together, I got so angry about that. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw it, because it's everyone's making sacrifices, and you decided that you're not going to take this seriously enough, and you're going to run a 5K, run a hard effort, group together in a state that has had a good amount of cases. I don't know. If it depends on how seriously we want to take it. If we want to take it not seriously and run impromptu races and huddle together even though races have been canceled, that defeats the purpose. So everyone just needs to work together. And that's where I think with the Olympics, everyone is kind of on the same page in that kind of accept that something's going to happen, but understanding that the limiting of travel, the limiting of mass gatherings, and ultimately, for humanity's sake, that's the important thing. I want to take this in two ways. So first, just to outline what I'm going to talk with you guys. I'm going to talk about the IOC kind of coming out, giving their statement. I want to talk to you about the vibe I've gotten from different athletes. I've kind of reached out to a couple people that I'm friends with and that I'm comfortable that they'll give me kind of their true feelings on this whole thing. Give you their thoughts, and then talk about the contract implications as far as runners go. Because something I want to do more of this podcast is kind of open up the door into that side of the sport, because it can be so secretive sometimes. So let's read the IOC's briefing on what they think is going to happen with the games. So preamble. Today, the IOC continued its consultations with all stakeholders of the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. The first took place with the International Olympic Summer Sports Federations, those with the National Olympic Committees, the athlete representatives, the International Paralympic Committee, and other international federations and other stakeholders will follow in the coming days. This communication sets out the principles established by the IOC Executive Board, together with their implementation in cooperation with all stakeholders concerned. The IOC will continue to act as a responsible organization in the context. In this context, the IOC asks all its stakeholders within its own remits to do everything to contribute to the containment of the virus. And so before I go further, remember that this is on the heels of the Diamond League announcing that they're going to postpone their first 3 meets as of now. It's on the heels of the European Football Championships, which was going to be hosted between various European countries this year, has already postponed till 2021. So when I look at international competitions, you look at those two as being precursors to what the IOC need to look at. And then you also look at the Diamond League pushing their meets back and looking at what opportunities are there for athletes to qualify. All the big meets in America are being pushed back. The Diamond League's pushed back. There will be no collegiate season. There's not a lot of opportunities. There are 0 opportunities for people to race. So how are they going to qualify for the Olympics? Okay, so on to the communication. It's an unprecedented situation for the whole world, and our thoughts are with all those affected by this crisis. We are in solidarity with the whole of society to do everything to contain the virus. The situation around the COVID-19 virus is also impacting the preparations for the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020 and is changing day by day. The IOC remains fully committed to the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020, and with more than 4 months to go before the Games, there is no need for any drastic decisions at this stage, and any speculation at this moment would be counterproductive. Counterproductive. Remember that. No speculation. All speculation would be counterproductive. I'm going to be a little bit counterproductive here in a bit. The IOC encourages all athletes to continue to prepare for the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020 as best they can. We will keep supporting the athletes by consulting with them and their respective NOCs and by providing them with the latest information development, which are accessible for athletes worldwide. We will continue to act in a responsible way and have agreed the following overriding principles about staging the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. Number 1, to protect the health of everyone involved and to support the containment of the virus. Number 2, to safeguard the interests of the athletes and of Olympic sport. The IOC will continue to monitor the situation 24/7. Already in mid-February, a task force was set up consisting of the IOC, the World Health Organization and Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee, the Japanese authorities, and Tokyo Metropolitan Government. On and on and on. So I have some issues, as you can tell by the tone of my voice. I've already talked about one. The one issue would be how will athletes qualify? We kind of talked about that. My issue number 2 would be, can we guarantee that by the time the Olympics kick off that Japan will be coronavirus free? Maybe. We might be able to because they haven't been hit as hard as other countries have, necessarily. Number 3, can we ensure that athletes can train safely? No, we can't. Any Olympics that will be held this year at the normal time will not be a full-strength Olympics because not everybody's going to be able to train or do the requisite things to qualify at this point. At this point, we're beyond saving as far as that goes. Any Olympics held now, like, Olympic athletes have come down with COVID-19, so it's just not possible to have a full-strength Olympics. Number 4, can we ensure that this will be a clean sport games? Can we ensure that drug testing will be on point to where it has been in previous games, in previous World Championships? Without a competition testing, we cannot, because at this point, you can't be sending field testers out there to test athletes when you don't know if they've come in contact with any asymptomatic people or anybody showing COVID-19 symptoms or anything like that. So just for the sake of the testers, the sake of the athletes, because you don't know if any of those testers have been in contact with it, you can't be doing that right now. So you can't guarantee that there will be clean sport games. And UK Sports has come out already and said that they are massively scaling down their anti-doping operation, just given the scope of the virus and everything. So you can't ensure that. They did lay out some outlines for qualification in case representative leagues can't hold their usual Olympic trials, things like that. All quota places that have already been allocated to date remain allocated to the nations and the athletes that obtained them. So think U.S. Olympic trials, that would stay. The possibility remains to use existing and scheduling qualification events wherever these still have fair access for the athletes and teams. We're going to get to that in a second. Number 3, all necessary adaptations to qualification systems and all allocation of the remaining places will be A, based on all field results. So think of the World Athletics rankings that started last year that we kind of talked. I've had a couple episodes where I've gone through. I will link below. I have an episode where I go through the past World Championships and kind of talk about who would be the qualifiers and who wouldn't based on the historical qualifications, top 3 versus field rankings. And B, reflect where possible the existing principles of the respective qualification system. So use the rankings again for global, continental, regional, specific event results. Any increase in athlete quotas will be considered on a case-by-case basis under exceptional circumstances with the support of the organizing committee of Tokyo 2020. So that's the Olympics. And I think it's still very, very aggressive to say that it will go on as planned, like Japan has come out and said. I don't think you can say that right now. Things are changing by the second with the news, and I mean, yesterday they were talking about the NHL finishing up the season, having like a 24-team tournament, having like 5 games you play before that, and today they announced that they won't be trying to finish up the season, but they could still do playoffs, that sort of thing. So that's the difference a day makes. And you're talking about trying to forecast 6 months from now what that's going to be like, and it's going to be impossible. The next thing is the U.S. trials themselves. Now, like it's been said, you can't pick a team based on historical results and rankings, but if there aren't a lot of results to base those rankings off of, you're basically picking like past World Championship finishers and whoever had a good indoor season, which isn't ideal because not a lot of people raced indoors, not a lot of people raced last year with this being an Olympic year coming up. Also, with USATFs, and this is where I'll get into talking with athletes that I've kind of reached out to, there are a lot of contract incentives based around how you finish at USAs and whether you're a US champion or whether you're a US qualifier or whether you reach the final. And that seems to be what everyone's most worried about. I think the real life money on the table that's going to be lost with having no USATF championships versus the Olympic dream. It's kind of like romantic versus realistic, right? So I want to get to like a couple testimonials. I'll say testimonials, but a couple quotes. I'm not going to say who I got it from because I want to keep that somewhat confidential. So I asked people, what are your thoughts? Have you thought about the Olympics yet? One athlete said, I'm mentally preparing for that. I think there's a pretty good chance. I hope they do because it seems like if they go off as scheduled, it would only be a half Olympics and so many athletes can't train. Spectators would be limited, etc. I want the full Olympic experience if I make it, and I don't think I'd get that if they were held in August. So that's one athlete's thoughts, is that Olympics as they are now are going to be not quite what you dream of when you have the Olympic dream. Another athlete I asked, had you talked about the potential of the Olympics being postponed? How worried is everybody? They said, yeah, we've talked about it some, trying to not worry about things, nothing you can really do about it. I think overall people are thinking more about the trials with the contract stipulations and everything involving that. I asked another athlete, let me open up my Instagram real quick, what they thought. And again, same kind of ideal, that they don't care as much about the Olympics. If they have to run it later in the year or next year, it doesn't matter as much, but the idea of skipping USATFs and missing out on contract incentives does worry me a lot. Another athlete that isn't an American athlete, I asked if they were worried about the Olympics being proposed. They said, not honestly. All I want is an outdoor season, and if the Olympics are later in the year, that's fine with me. So I don't think it's necessarily gotten there yet, to where everyone is realizing that, I don't know, I think the scope of this thing is bigger than we think it is. I honestly think the likelihood that we have an outdoor season is not very high. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, because I also want things to talk about. I don't know necessarily what I do with the rest of this podcast the rest of the year. If there isn't, we'll figure things out. Don't worry. I'll think of something. I'll have some interviews. That's more or less me just freaking out in real time. But I also asked We Are the Sport, who's trying to kind of be the new athletics union, the new athletics representative for the U.S. athletes, for athletes everywhere. I asked them, have you given any thought about what you're going to do if it is postponed, if the Olympics is postponed? I'm hoping everyone's contracts are protected from this. And they said, there's so much uncertainty, we will be hoping to offer as much support to athletes as we can during these difficult times. So it's like, it just really drills the point home that no one really knows what to expect, but there is going to be real money left on the table. So I think you look at athletes as not at the same level as people who aren't, who don't have an athletic contract, right? That it's a different world between the athletics world and, for lack of a better world, the real world, the business world, we'll call it. But these athletes are going to feel a really big hit. The incentives for USATFs are huge. Probably the only thing bigger would maybe be if you win the Diamond League, that's $1 million. But for contract incentives, I think the only thing bigger is probably going to be something having to do with Diamond League. But I think the USATFs is still bigger outside of Olympic gold. So there's a lot of money being left on the table just with contract incentives and everything that comes from that. And from the spirit of the sports side, not having that to rally upon is going to be upsetting. And knowing that we just rallied upon what Jake Riley was able to do at the Olympic trials, what Alafine was able to do at the Olympic trials, only for it to not mean anything, that would kind of suck. Because I don't know if you push back the Olympics to 2021, I don't know if you go into it with the exact same marathon team. Given that one of your marathoners is 42 years old at this point, I don't know what the process would be for that, and they haven't really talked about it. Obviously, given the idea that everyone is thinking that it's going to go on as planned. There's also the real life situation that we currently have American coaches stuck in Ethiopia who are part of a training group, and everything kind of happened so quickly that they couldn't get out of there in time. So we have American track and field representatives who are stuck in foreign countries and haven't been able to get back yet. Just to keep things super vague for you. It's tough. I think we're all definitely feeling it. There's not, it's been talked about to death about what has happened. I'm sure you've heard it on every sports podcast you've listened to this week, that no one really knows what to say about it, what kind of perspective to give it. But I think just recognizing that we're in such a unique situation, such a unique time. Everyone in the world is going through it. Everyone in the world is going to remember what they were doing during COVID-19. And it's historical. So on the ride home, I went through downtown Kansas City, and I took pictures and sent to my dad because it was during rush hour. You can see it on my Instagram story right now if you listen to this podcast soon enough. And there were not one car on Main Street, which usually during rush hour is pretty busy and a lot of noise, road traffic, and there really wasn't. It just shows you how odd of a time this is in the world. So now that that's out of the way, now that I've talked my anxieties into the mic and hopefully I didn't trigger anybody, I asked you guys on Twitter yesterday to lob any questions you had my way, because I was looking to talk about some other things outside of just this. So I asked, hoping to answer some running training live questions at the end of the podcast. Drop me some questions. So Jackson Lee asked, how are you doing in all of this? Kind of explained that, but I'm doing better today. I wasn't doing as well yesterday and the day before because I was coming into grips with the idea of not working for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and I'm still not ecstatic about that prospect, but I think I was able to put some of it into perspective today, and it helped. And being on medication definitely helps because I am not spiraling out of control like I would usually do. And it's easier for me, like on medication, it's easier for me to go through my kind of practices that I built up over time to like really center myself and make sure that I don't have a panic attack and really kind of get control of that. So that's been really helpful. So I'm doing good. I'm doing as good as you can be in a time like this. Okay, so Shauna asks, pivoting from half marathon training to 5K training, 5K training tips for not a beginner. Everything online is so beginner focused. Training for hilly races like the October half, I just impulsively signed up for without checking the elevation map. Yeah, I mean, so if we think of like half marathon training in the traditional sense, half marathon training is a lot like how we would build up a base getting ready for a cross country season. You know, you're working on your long runs, you're doing a lot of like long, steady workouts with maybe some faster stuff mixed in. 5K training is kind of the opposite of that. So it's kind of nice to have that period of long mileage, so especially coming out of the half, where you have that kind of higher mileage, now you can come back down. Ideally, the big thing is going to be workouts. So you want to get your mileage to a point where you can handle it. And then your workouts are going to be more 5K specific. So I like to think of it as like an ends to middle approach. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but coming into the season, you're going to be still like focused on that base phase. So think of like 12 weeks out from the 5K, from your goal 5K. You're going to be focused more on the base phase. So more mileage, longer runs, tempo runs, and like strides, shorter speed stuff. Things that, you know, help you focus on your turnover and your efficiency. From there, you'll kind of go, again, so from the ends, work your way into the middle. So from strides, you're going to do some mile pace workouts. So my favorite one was 200, 200, 400, so 224s. Basically, it's 200s at mile pace. Mile pace, if you've never run a mile, is basically just, it's hard but not all out, and you want to make sure that you can cover from rep to rep. So it might take a little bit of adjusting, especially if you don't have a coach that can kind of get you through those paces. But if you've just run a half, you can go to Macmillan. You can find it by looking up a VDOT calculator, and you can figure out your mile pace from your half marathon time. But essentially what a 224 is, you run a 200 at mile pace, take 30 seconds rest, you run a 200 mile pace, take 30 seconds rest, run a 400 meter at mile pace. That's one that hurts because you're just off the 30 seconds rest from the 200, and then you take 3 minutes rest in between sets. Typically, I would do 3 to 4, but for you probably are good with just 2. You don't have to do a whole lot of that to get a lot of benefit out of it. From there, I would go from tempos, maybe some tempo fartleks or CV, so 10K type pace stuff. You can do a lot with that. You can do cruise intervals, that kind of like mid-range, not quite 5K pace, but still working pretty hard kind of pace. That way you can do a little bit more than you would off of 5K, and you're not like totally sharpening the axe just yet. Then when you get to about 8 to 4 weeks out, depending on how you're feeling, depending on your fitness, probably like more 6 to 4 weeks, that's when you start introducing 5K pace. So sometimes you can start with like more of a fartlek. I kind of like that for beginners or for people who aren't as experienced in 5K training, because it's kind of run hard, but it's a lot of effort, and then you get easy sections, then run hard, effort, easy sections. That 4 to 2 weeks out is when you want to get into your main workout. So typically for me, that's going to be real hard 5K pace, to think of like 1K repeats or 800 meter repeats. At 5K pace, you want to do 5K's worth of work, equal rest on those. Then I want to do like a 2 to 3 to 4 mile tempo, depending on where your fitness is. It could be longer too. With my college kids, we would do about 6 to 7 mile tempo that week. So you do the 5K pace work, you do 7 mile tempo, and you do your long run. And that's a pretty good week. And usually those guys are running 60 to 80 miles, maybe more if they're, depending on the type of person. It's all individualized. And then my girls were running 30 to 50 to 60, 70 on the long end. So it's very individualized. Some of it you might have to pick and choose here. And then 2 weeks to the race day, you're going to kind of taper. So think of that as like sharpening. So depending on the runner, sometimes I don't like to taper the mileage. I like to keep the mileage the same, but the workouts are going to be shorter and they're going to be faster. So you might do, less 5K intervals, but less time in between. Not quite as much because you don't need as much stimulus, because after 10 days out, you're not gaining as much, but maybe mentally it helps just to know where that pace is. So, Shauna, hopefully that helps. Hopefully I didn't make things too convoluted for you, but feel free to DM me if you have any questions about that, because I would be more than happy to go on at length about 5K training. And there's a lot of different things you can do to get there. I actually ran my best 5Ks barely touching a 5K pace, because me personally, 5K pace just like fried me out so bad. So we did a lot of mileage in the summer, mileage, strides, mile pace workouts, and like longer but not quite tempo. So like just above tempo pace. And then as we got more in season, we did CV pace stuff. I did a lot of CV pace stuff because that's kind of like 10K pace. And you can do more of it, and the way it works physiologically is it works your VO2, which is going to be what your 5K pace is kind of based off of. And it still is, sometimes you're kind of around that threshold as well, depending on the length of the repeat. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds there. And it's a hard pace to get a hold of, but it doesn't beat you down as much either. So you can do a lot of CV pace work. It's what Tin Man is kind of like famous for. So the reason we did it is because Coach Stiles, who is the Washington University coach, was my coach, Kelly Blake's head coach, and he got a lot of his influence from Tin Man and like with the CV stuff anyway. So they did a lot of that because a big team, you're at like a really influential university, and there's a lot of like academic stress, so you can do a lot of CV stuff and not like really fry yourself out. So it's a good workout to do when you're worried about like having long days at work and just being like generally stressed, because you can cut it short and still get a good stimulus out of it, or you can go a little bit longer and you're going to recover a little bit quicker. So long story short, sometimes you don't even need to do 5K pace work to run a good 5K, but it just kind of depends on what works for you. Like with everything, it's individualized, but yeah, like I said, just email me, message me if you have any questions about that. Okay, moving on. Runner's Knees asks, I've always had issues with this, but there has to be a point in long distance training when you say, I can't go and run a 20 or 30 mile each week in training. So what sort of maximum distances should people look at for longer distance races, 100Ks, 100 miles, etc.? I think what I found is that, of course, your top ultramarathoners, like Jim Walmsley is doing a 30-mile run most weekends. But what really matters is the cumulative of training. So for ultramarathoners, you almost get as much doing a 13 and a 15-mile run as you do doing a 20-mile run one weekend. So I'll call Brian out. When I coached Brian to his first 100-miler, that was one thing he did, because he was kind of coming from like half marathon. He wanted to jump into 50-miler and then 100-miler. So one of the things we did is, instead of going one long run, is we stacked the long run. So we build up our mileage generally, but some weeks we would do like 12-15, 15-13, something where you go long and then you have to go long again the next day. So it just really focuses on that time on your feet and just recovering. And sometimes I think you get more out of it, because when you go over 2 hours in a marathon, or when you go over 2 hours in a long run, you're really breaking your body down. And sometimes you need to go over that 2 hours to get a benefit, but you don't have to do that all the time. And if you can avoid going over 2 hours and instead going an hour 40 one day and 2 hours the next, or 2 hours one day, an hour 30 the next, I think you get a lot of benefit from that, as opposed to going like 3 hours one day. Obviously, racing a 100-miler, there are times where you need to have those long days on your feet, just like there are times where you need to have workouts that you can't go any further, but everything has a time and a place, and You don't want to be breaking yourself down all the time. Steve Magnus said a good part in his book that you can only go to the well so many times. So if you think of like, keep it at a minimum each training cycle, the amount of times that you really are reaching to finish a run or to finish a workout. So if you can get through a lot better going 15-15 or what have you versus going 30 in one day, you might save yourself a little bit of time on the weekend or on some days on the weekend, and maybe it's a little more manageable for you. So I hope that helps. And like I said, if you guys have questions, feel free to DM me, email me. They're always open. And with that, I'm going to shut down this podcast. Hopefully going forward, obviously I won't have sports to talk about, but I can update what's going on with the Olympics and what's going on with USATFs, what's going on with me in my life. I'll try to get some interviews with athletes. I think that'll be a good thing to cover, good thing to buy the time. I just don't know if everyone's wanting to do interviews right now, if everyone's wanting to talk about their Olympic dreams when their Olympic dreams are kind of on hiatus. So we'll figure something out. Well, I'll always be here to help you guys fill the void, fill the quarantine. You can listen with your cats when you're trying to do work. It's a time when we're all going to be confined to our apartments and our houses more than usual. So if I can give you something to listen to, some content to fill that space, hopefully I can still do that. Anyway, if you don't find anything on the podcast, look at the YouTube page. I'm usually putting out stuff during the week that might or might not come on the podcast. But in the meantime, you can always follow me at HornickerJustin on Instagram and Twitter. And we will meet again next week. So remember to work hard. Remember to be nice. Happy running. Let's make smart choices.
I'm here to change the game up, I'm here to shuffle up the deck. You'll probably think I'm famous cause I got a blue check. I remember playing ball up in Montreal, Quebec, the richest